first game was really tense. Both guys demonstrating really nice offensive and defensive ideas. And for the second time, we have an e4, e5. Also, both guys striking with the black pieces. And we see Magnus playing an Italian sideline here with h6.
Okay, well, I was a fan of that move until I saw bishop e7, because g7, g5 has gotten really popular recently for black.
And g6 as well, to put the bishop there. Generally, black plays h6 to stop any of white's pieces from going to the g5 square. And this is kind of an edgier way to play the Italian, but generally bishop to e7 and h6 is kind of rare.
It also catches my eye that Magnus is not playing d6, which is often automatic, which tells me he might want to go d7, d5 in one fell swoop. But that's a really risky proposition, especially seeing the move rook e1. Magnus is like, nope, thanks, but no thanks. He plays d6. The good thing about the Italian for black, there's not a lot of good things about facing the Italian, but one of the redeeming factors that you can basically do anything you want. Put the bishop on e7, put it on c5, and you might be slightly worse, but you're not likely to be losing out of the opening.
That's the nice thing, right? You can play forever, and you can be fine. You can be slightly worse, you can be slightly better, and there's the most difficult thing by far about learning the Italian is learning the Italian, ironically. So with all the different setups and where the pieces can go and whether you can play h6, knight h7 and king h8, f5, that's like, to me, and knight g5. I mean, these are the things you get after a decade of playing. And bishop f6, like, what are we even doing here? The knight is going to e7.
Every time I think I have a handle on Magnus's plan, okay, he's definitely going to go f5. That's why he brought the knight off from f6. Nope. He puts a bishop in front of the f-pawn. And Levy, this is kind of how Hikaru was playing yesterday against the Ruy Lopez.
By the way, Danya, h3, I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
h3
please.
is literally to move the knight to h2 and then make the g5 knight look dumb and play h4, g3, etc. probably. Like, what is happening here?
Well, we saw knight h7 and knight h2 in the King's Indian game. Now we might see both of those moves played in an Italian game. But watch for c6 and d5. This is the drawback of putting the queen on b3. Okay. Speaking of drawbacks.
Drawback. You make a move backwards. Alireza comes forward. That's generally his playing style. Knight g6. This is such an absurd Italian position. What is going on?
Got this weird cluster of pieces on the king side. It looks like Magnus is setting up for an attack, but that's going to be hard to follow through on because Alireza can essentially bail out whenever he wants to. Is now the time, and Levy, knight takes g5 could be met by h takes g5, creating a real stronghold on f4.
I was just about to suggest the move bishop f1, and you basically move the bishop out of the way because you don't want that queenside offensive with c6, d5 to hit it, and you also defend your king side.
Yeah, defend against any shenanigans with knight takes h3. I'm a big fan of those sacks. Where's Magnus's light squared bishop going to go? Is he going to fianchetto it?
Very odd. I really like where it's standing now, but you can't move it. That's the problem. You can't play bishop d7 because b7 hangs in a lot of positions. Yeah, he very well could go b6. I mean, yeah, and there you go. The plan of the Italian is you can keep the bishop on one diagonal or the other. Another thing, though, Danya, he could have played b6 not to go to b7, but to just move the bishop.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where you could be playing this move to fianchetto this bishop, but you're also playing it to build up the pawn chain. So he could be going this way. He could be going no way and just staying on home base. It's one of those cases where the bishop is essentially developed without having made a single move. Wow. You could maybe sacrifice it at some later point.
The sign of a player that doesn't know what to do in a position is when he repeats the position and his opponent hasn't repeated the position. So bishop f1 to c4. And I wonder now, Magnus can't play b6 to b7, unfortunately.
That would be a pretty enticing three-time repetition. Rook to b8, maybe ensuring that bishop d5 doesn't come with tempo. Now, I mean, white could still play bishop d5 going for some of these light squares, but that doesn't seem to be where the party is at. Also, let's not forget, I was going to say d takes e5 can happen at some point and totally change the nature of the position.
Now the position is opening up, so the d file opens, you start looking, how can white activate this knight on d2? I mean, in general, in every position that needs to be played in a positional manner or a strategic manner, you start looking around and going, what's my worst piece? The knight on d2, yeah, it could go to f1. The problem is e4 is hanging in a lot of positions, and if you move the knight to f1 right now, you get taken on f3. So what do you do?
Yeah, the knight on d2 is like, you know, that kid in PE class who hasn't been chosen by anybody to team up with. I have not had any experience with that.
We don't need to go down my childhood memories, okay? And that is why
I just went down mine. Bishop takes g5, and knight to f1, knight to e3, Levy. You made the right call. You want to go knight c4 in these types of positions. Barring that, bishop takes g5 is a pretty big concession because you are allowing h takes g5, and to my eyes, that's what Magnus has to do if he wants to unbalance this position, which he doesn't.
And as you finish your sentence, he says, Danya, I have completely other plans. And he has no intentions of attacking Alireza on the king side. He does have an intention of having an active dark-squared bishop.
Interesting positionally minded decisions by Magnus. I mean, you know, he's played into Alireza's King's Indian. He hasn't played the same-ish. He played a very pure. You can see him steering the game into more balanced territory. That's kind of what we saw from Hikaru yesterday. It's what we saw from Hikaru against Alireza, except he failed in that. What are we going to see here from Magnus? Knight to h4. Feels like this move has been played 1,000 times in this match, as has knight h2, which I think it might be time for.
Just trying to get rid of some of Alireza's active pieces and take the game to a 2-bishop versus bishop-knight middle game. But then the question becomes, what is Magnus going to do with his pawns, Danya? Like, he's not going to move the c-pawn because then b6 becomes weak. And he's not going to move the f-pawn because the e-pawn becomes weak. So, I mean, I just like White's position.
It feels like Magnus, he overcooked it a little bit. He had a chance to play hg. You know, he's trying to trade off Alireza's strong pieces, and he's succeeding, but new strong pieces are replacing them. And Alireza solved the main problem in his position. This knight on e3 used to be on d2. Now it's the coolest kid in the class. We're not going down my childhood
another
memories.
set of childhood memories, yeah.
I think c6 might be a sad necessity. It might be the lesser evil. Maybe prepares b5 in some universe, but there's no question Alireza is better now. You might even see him playing a crazy move like queen a3 to get the d-file.
Oh man, you kind of stole my thunder there. I was like, yeah, if c6, queen a3, and then you get the b-file, and the b6 pawn is quite vulnerable. The easy way for people watching here and at home to think about this position, the bishop and the knight for white can both operate on the light squares, and the bishops for black can't both operate on the light squares. So Alireza is going to focus on the light squares. You look at the d5 square, it's controlled by the pawn, the knight, the bishop, the queen, and the rook. And if he doubles, another rook. So
and maybe get the king to c6, so
yes.
Every single one of your pieces controls the same square.
Exactly. So that's the money square, and c6 is played.
Okay, c6, and the fact that Magnus took like a minute on that move tells you he is not a happy camper when he plays it. The bishop is pushed away. Black is really cramped, and I mean, the King's Indian game and now this one, Alireza's positional handling has been really awesome to see. g6 by Magnus, trying to slither away to g7. Maybe that f7, f5 idea is going to make an appearance, but for that to happen, you need to also move your king. Alireza doesn't have forever. He needs to find a way to generate a new wave of the attack. Whether it's queen a3 or doubling the rooks, hard to say.
And Magnus is always taking a look at that b5 move. That b5 move is coming at a critical moment to open up the b-file. Right now, it's just simply not possible. We have kingside improvements being made.
h4, h5, just finishing the architectural beautification of the position.
Yes, h4, h5. I mean, you generally answer h4 with h5. Magnus is debating if he wants to do it. Magnus is very careful in general as a player with pawn moves.
Yeah, that's a great insight. You don't see him making weaknesses willy-nilly. I mean, Hikaru sometimes takes more liberties on that front, but Magnus is very positionally trained. His position always seems really healthy.
Wow, except that move!
But
as we were talking about rook
d5, look at that f5 square levy.
Yeah, rook d. I mean, g5 is that is Magnus trying to take a risk.
No, that is Magnus hearing the commentators leaking in his ear and saying he doesn't make any weaknesses.
He cannot hear us, all right? Do not put any ideas into former world champions' heads, all right? Rook to d6 is the best move. It's a natural move because it does attack the c6 pawn, and Alireza has to realize, Danya, that opening the G and H files actually benefits him and not Magnus, and he's played it.
Dude, Gary Kasparov didn't like what you just said. Of course, that's what you were referring to. Rook to d6. Guess what? You're not just threatening rook c6. That threatens rook takes c8. And then knight f5, this is mind-blowing. Magnus just self-destructing, losing his patience.
Yeah, rook takes c8 is a fatal threat. The game is over.
And if you move your king levy, knight d5, another fatal threat. It's a double attack.
Rook
takes c8.
Bishop e3.
Rook takes f8, and you lose a piece. Maybe White's king gets weak at the end of the line, but there's no way that Magnus can get away with this.
But rook c8 is... Alireza just... I think he's composing himself. If he doesn't see rook c8, it's a very bad sign. He's played it.
But I think he's worried maybe a little bit about bishop takes c3 and then queen g5 at the end of the line. But Magnus has no pieces in the attack. You could play rook to g1 after queen g5.
He's just up a piece, Danya. Queen c2. Look at that move, bringing the queen back for defensive purposes.
Saying, come take this pawn. I'm going to drop away to h1. Queen f3.
Queen g2.
Check.
Is a check. You stop guarding your own rook, but it's a cross check. And now, you maybe even rook g1, although that's a bit cramped of a move. Maybe rook f1.
Queen g2. Anything wins. Magnus has no attack. He had one threat. That was queen f3 check. g5 was unbelievable. I mean, you just don't see that kind of self-destruction from Magnus.
We were just talking about how careful he is with pawn moves.
Oh my gosh. Rook g8.
Commentator's curse.
Always.
Rook g1 maybe just easy.
You could even take the queen.
Yeah.
How many pawns does Black have for the piece? Only one? He's about to have 0.
Yes, bishop takes f7 here, bishop d5. I mean, the doubled h pawns do not intimidate anybody.
If Alireza had 5 seconds here, I'd have full faith in his ability to win this game. I would go for b4, just create a pass pawn, gobble up f7. He's got a menu of options here, and he's about to have a 1-point lead for the first time in this match.
The only reason he's playing so slowly is because he has the time. You know, you get such a winning position against Magnus with a time lead, you're like, okay, don't blow it. All right, let me just gather myself, and he's going to pick up as many pawns as possible, and then he's likely to get the win.
c4 is possible. You're absolutely right, Levin. When you play people like Magnus and Hikaru, you see ghosts, right? You double, triple check stuff that normally you wouldn't. And this is very professionally handled by Alireza. He's got 30 seconds on his clock. He's making every one of those seconds count for him.
Yeah,
Resign time.
And,
Resign time.
And there it is.
Whoa, whoa.